#SAFM Talking Point.
Okay, you're listening to the Talking Point. Of course, it is Municipal Watch. And this morning, we're looking at public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Miyelani Holeni is the Chief Group Advisor in DSO Consulting, also an expert in local governance revenue matters. Miyelani, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, good morning, Kathy, and good morning to the listeners.
As our resident expert on municipalities, today we are going to be focusing on public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Firstly, do you find that the nature and form that these relationships take is different to what we see on a national level? Let's say, for example, last year, we had that backlog at the country sports. Before you know it, there's a committee that we're told has been put together that includes the private sector that is working to unlock some of the challenges. So that's a recent example of a public-private partnership that I can point to at a national level that seems to have worked because we don't necessarily have those blockages at the ports anymore. They seem to be continuing their work. Of course, it's all not, I don't want to say it's not transparent, but we don't get to see fully what is going on behind the scenes. The level of transparency around those partnerships is perhaps not what it would be if this was a process that was being solely undertaken by a government department. So do they take on the same form?
I think in terms of public-private partnerships, we must view them firstly as something that, or at least an instrument that is available for government to be able to tap into the private sector, whether it's finance, whether it's skills, whether it's design capabilities, and so on and so forth. So the question in terms of the comparison between the national or provincial as well as municipalities is a fair one, because municipalities sit on the other side with infrastructure that must benefit many more people. And of course, we're not saying that the ports don't benefit the country as a whole, but if you assess the fact that there's water resources, there's electricity, there are roads, and all the different services or economic infrastructure as well as social infrastructure that is there at local government, it definitely requires that there be more involvement. We don't see a lot of involvement, or at least a lot of public-private partnership projects being undertaken at local government. I think that's perhaps the answer. We're seeing a lot happening at national, and we are not seeing it extending to the infrastructure that is widely available, save for the Gautrain, for instance, that has been put in place, save for the hospitals that or the health side that we can delve into to indicate how they've used PPPs to unlock the health care provision and specialist health care provision in some cases, such as renal and facilities and other facilities. So the issue here is that we believe that triple Ps or PPPs should be widely used at a municipal level, because it can unlock so much from an infrastructure point of view, and as much as it's being used at a national level. But there are more use cases at a local government to drive the usage of triple Ps and to gain the skills that are required and the financing. And of course, the risk is the other aspect which can be transferred from government into the private sector.
Miyelani, there are people who disagree with that view, that in fact we shouldn't have more public-private partnerships, we should have less. Because all that does is that it creates a reliance of the state on the private sector. And ultimately, when these private players come in, all they're doing is creating a pipeline for how these services that are primarily supposed to be administered, fully administered by the state, then end up being outsourced to the private sector. And while it might be in a crisis situation, not necessarily a bad thing. So if you're sitting without water and you know that if there's some kind of agreement struck between a municipality and a private partner that could get you water tomorrow, you're not necessarily going to be opposed to it. But the long-term effect of that, of course, might have very different outcomes, including for you as a citizen.
Kathy, perhaps we should unpack what a triple P or PPP is, because I think some of the arguments that are being advanced may indicate that there is not an in-depth understanding of what a triple P or PPP is supposed to achieve. So firstly, a PPP is a contract between the public sector, which is government, as well as a private institution. So firstly, I think the word contract is a crucial one, because it does not amount to just an outsource or privatization for that matter, but it's the ability or capability that is sourced by the public sector from a private entity to be able to deliver the services that the public sector is supposed to deliver. Now, what are the cases that would necessitate that there be such a partnership? One, shortage of financial resources, deficiency of skills, risk associated with the particular project, and the aspect around galvanizing the usage as well as the management of that particular facility. So those are the key four things that are we can put forward as a way of invoking a triple P. Now, it's of course, there's a time period to a triple P. It may be a 15-year concession, it may be a 20-year concession, or it may even be a 30-year concession with regards to how those facilities and the contracts and the financing structure has been put in place. Now, the other aspect of it is that whilst the facility will be operated between government as well as the private sector will be responsible for resourcing it and employing people who are going to render those services. Now, when the concession ends, there is a transfer clause which says that facility is now being transferred to the public sector, be it health, be it Department of Transport, be it water and sanitation, and all of the different departments that may have participated in such. So there is a transfer clause. But the idea is that get the facility to be running, finance it, build it, make it a state-of-the-art facility that also employs the very same nurses or the very same doctors or the very same public officials who at the end of that concession will still be part and parcel of government. But you have unlocked a critical area of infrastructure which would not have finance within the fiscus, because the other option is that government must finance within the fiscus, and if there are shortages, it means they have to keep on budgeting and delaying the provision of such services.
I want us to get into some of the practical examples that we can look at where these triple Ps, as you describe it, have taken place. Also, so that we make it practical for myself and everybody else that's listening to this conversation.
So let me start by saying there are different formations, or at least archetypes of triple Ps. There is one where you design, finance, build, operate, and then transfer. Okay, so that is the first option. So it means that the responsibility has now been conceded to the private party to carry out all of the designs, the financing, construct. So it's a turnkey project, if you put it in the current terminology of how projects are being rolled out within government. But this is financed solely from the private sector. It's an off-balance sheet financing equivalent to a project financing way of financing infrastructure. So it does not add the burden on the government side to be able to go and borrow money. They may, of course, pay a unitary fee, which is just a once-off fee or an annual fee or whatever the periods that are required where they are paying towards the operations of all of that. Then there's designing, financing, and operating. You design, you can build, operate, and then transfer, and so on. So those are some of the different examples. So when I explain, for instance, in terms of roads, you'll find that the N4 toll concession is one such that Sanral undertook not so long ago. The private party designed, they financed it, built it, they operate it, and after a period of time, which is about 30 years, they will then be transferring it. Now, you can, as government, also opt to refinance because perhaps, the collection of revenue from that infrastructure does not equal to the amount that can settle whatever the debt is that was incurred by the private party. Then they can extend it. But government at this during that concession are also earning money, and it's money that they would not be able to earn if they had not if they had not participated in such a particular scheme. So they cover roads, the N4, the N3. The various corridors that must be unlocked, and that is economic infrastructure. So if you view it in that way, the economic infrastructure is very important for the movement of goods, movement of people, to access the ports, to access the various areas where goods can be moved easily. Then there's also on the health side, which is more looking at the health facilities, and this we can count as your social facilities, where you sort out the health and dialysis facility. There's the big one, which is the King Albert Lutuli, Chief Albert Lutuli Hospital, which is one of the heralded, state-of-the-art, hospitals. It can also permeate into tourism, where SANParks has also invoked triple Ps to build specific concessions of lodges and all of that. And what happens is that they increase their revenue base, and they don't have to get involved in the operations of such. So there are merits, of course, but each one of these PPPs must be designed in such a way that it must have a benefit, a public benefit. And that is the underlying factor, public benefit without necessarily the risk. There are many projects that are standing still today where government wanted to undertake those projects and finance them. And unfortunately, they've become a standstill projects, or they are incomplete and therefore are not able to bring the benefit which was required, whether it was services to the population, or it was revenue into the fiscus, or to reduce the risk, and so on and so forth. So triple Ps is just but another way of augmenting what government is already doing from the fiscus. However, the guidelines are there that define how this process must be managed so that it does not just become a free-for-all type situation, or a way of privatizing public amenities and public services, and taking away from government in that way. So I think those are the controls and what we can at least talk about in terms of how can we design a triple P framework that would enable public benefit to the citizens, whether it's financial, whether it's social, and all of that, such that, at the time that, the private sector obviously wants to make a return, they should be able to make that return that they would like to make, and can walk away and perhaps identify other projects that they can put forward or begin, so that, there can be services across the country. We have a growing population. In South Africa, we have influx of external people coming into the country. So there are pressures that are starting to cause cracks in the various public service amenities that the country is able to finance, or able to afford, or even able to plan for.
I want to use the example of the Gautrain that you touched on earlier, because of course this was a really critical infrastructure, and it's been mentioned quite a number of times just how much improving public transport will make a significant difference in the lives of South Africans. At a local level, we have seen the intervention of your rapid bus transport systems. Some of them work well, some of them not really. But there does seem to be a challenge whenever infrastructure overlaps across municipalities. So you have a Gautrain that goes through 3 different metros in this country. And maybe unpack that particular model.
So the Mbombela concession is quite an interesting one, with regards to the fact that it initially is a 20-year concession, started out in 2006. And as you can see, the movement of people in a rapid manner, in a timeous manner, would have been undertaken by the likes of PRASA to move people between different, whether it's suburbs or townships, whichever way you would like to call it. You would have seen people moving from the outskirts into the city center, but you did not have a public transport that would be able to move people within the cities in a rapid manner, except for using buses, except for using taxis, except for using private taxis and so on. So the Mbombela concession was an important one because it was linking 4 key nodes. It's linking the Johannesburg, it's linking the city of Tshwane, it's touching on the Ekurhuleni because of the airport. So really that triangle, if you may put it in that way, enabled the movement of people where they would rely on public transport and move between the cities. And that was an integration of the cities. If they talk about the Gauteng cities region, and it's meant to make sure that the gaps in between are closed. So PRASA would service a particular need. The taxis obviously still service a particular need. So the way that they had designed it, it's...
Miyelani, I'm going to pause you there before you get into the rest of that detail. We're going to continue this conversation looking at then these public-private partnerships. Where do you think there are opportunities for these partnerships to be fostered at a local level? I'd love to also hear your contributions on that. We'll continue the conversation with Miyelani shortly. It's 10:30, time for your latest news headlines.
Municipal Watch, bringing your local issues on the national agenda. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. We're focusing on public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Miyelani Holeni, Chief Group Advisor at Ndiso Consulting Group, is our guest this morning. He, of course, is also a local government and governance expert. So we've been unpacking then some of these models, and it's also quite insightful, right, to hear the various options that are available, at least what we have seen nationally, and how this could potentially then trickle down to local government. But Miyelani, you are still unpacking that the PPP of the Gautrain, and again, this being a project that touched through 3 different metros, and what it was really that made it work.
So let's the structure of it. Firstly, it's initiated by the Gauteng Province Department of Transport, and as it's aptly called, it's a rapid rail link that must link various cities all the way to the airport, which I think it's a unique one, because building on what the airport does, is touching another sphere of transport. Of course, it touches where the buses would stop at Park Station. It touches where in the city of Tshwane, also where the bus area. So there was interconnectivity. Of course, we want to look at how widespread the facility or the amenity is going to be. If it's focused on just the key nodes and it's not spreading out into the various smaller suburbs and so on, there's a limitation. So number one, it's a 31 billion. It was a 31 billion rands project which was supposed to be running for over 20 years. What we see of it is that the makeup of it is it's a design, it's a finance, build, operate, and then transfer. However, the unique thing about the Gautrain is the fact that 87% of the funding is put forward by government, which is something that you want less government involvement. The reason why government would go into a triple P, for instance, is that they want to minimize the involvement from a funding point of view, from a financing point of view, from a risk point of view. And then the second issue is that coupled with that 87% provision of funding, only 2% is equity. In other words, whoever the partner is that is coming through is only providing 2% of the equity into the project. And lastly, then the rest of it then would be 11%, which is debt. So you want to at least look at how government can leverage the private sector. So this is government obviously carrying out the projects with them or on their own largely, and employing an operator and a designer who is going to design, build, and then operate. But the risk still lies mainly with government in this case, where they've had to, not so long, about 2 or 3 years ago, they've had to pay in quite a significant amount of money to keep the concession running. And of course, the other side is that, you have to collect their user charges, and there's a unitary payment or patronage guarantee which they've had to put forward. So that is where the equation of risk is not well balanced, or should have been improved at this stage. And there's also perhaps an opportunity now to look at how, when they refinance it, how do they then become less of a player or less of a financier, being government, that is, so that they can free that funding to go into other projects which are equally deserving, or to expand the network of what Gautrain links. And we'll contrast that, and we can contrast it with the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital, so that you can see the differences.
But please go ahead.
So on the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital, it's that's exactly the same format. It's a design, finance, build, operate, and transfer. It was started obviously in 2001 with a 15-year concession term. On this one, it's 70% debt. So they've had to source debt, obviously, from the private sector. Whoever the partner is had to put 20% equity. So contrast 20% versus 2% equity. And then government's contribution with regards to the entire project was only 10%. So you can see the equation is obviously different. But of course, the payment that comes from government is what they call a unitary payment, where government has to pay in to support the operations, to support whatever expenses that would come about there, because this is an academic hospital. It's for public good. It's for training doctors. It's for so it's for specialists. So it's to actually keep the skills and retain them within the private sector, and invite skills that are in the private sector to also be part and parcel of this particular facility. So you can see how the social facility in this case, government managed to play a lesser role from a funding point of view, and instead choosing debt, but the unitary payment obviously covers the shortfalls that would result in patients going to the hospital not being able to pay the private sector rates, but paying the public sector type of rates within there. So those are the differences in terms of a good PPP, where government, you want less government, and you want to transfer the risk within the contract that you enter into between the public sector as well as the private sector, such that everything else that happens, the benefit still accrues to the public sector. And then the transfer, when it's supposed to happen, you already have geared skills, you've trained people, and you have people who can essentially carry on with the running of that particular institutions, because the transfer clauses necessitates that the employees are not necessarily for the private sector, but will remain as the public sector employees to take the services forward.
I guess on the balancing act that you speak about, Miyelani, it's also about understanding that government is operating within a framework of limited resources. And unfortunately, this is something that we're seeing more and more of at a local government level.
Yes.
Municipalities are simply not collecting the revenue that they need in order to actually be building and maintaining their infrastructure. Some municipalities are facing fiscal issues by design of the system, not only because there is corruption and malfeasance, and that exacerbates the problem, but even if those problems didn't exist, you do have municipalities that would be struggling just to pay their bills because of equitable share and everything else that sort of goes into the legislative framework of municipalities. So how then do you see the opportunity for local government when it comes to these sorts of partnerships?
And I think that is for us the encouragement that we are putting forward for municipalities to source financing from private sector, and also source the skills. Municipalities, by their own design, are supposed to be collecting revenues. And we talk about it often that a municipality is a business within the public sector. So they rely on people paying user charges and people paying on time, paying in full, and not breaching the services or stealing the services that are supposed to be paid for. So that design in many of the municipalities where there is no industry or there is no strong economic base, it is not possible. So this is where you find your water infrastructure, your which is lying dormant, or they are not able to afford chemicals, they are not even afford the maintenance, and this is where a key partnership can take place with the private sector across the country if you take into account the 257 municipalities, and you can include the districts in a way within that figure. So those partnerships should be looking at that critical infrastructure. DTIC, for instance, has a grant that looks at critical infrastructure provision, which can become a seed capital to start to put into those PPPs, to kick them off so that they can be designed and they can be planning for expansion and growth and so on. So it is an opportunity that we see, and it's becoming a must that municipalities should be in a way of growing their own infrastructure and increasing both economic and social infrastructure, should be looking at partnerships. The likes of this is Mbombela has done a concession on the water side. The water concession company runs, the provision of water. It may be to some parts of Mbombela, but however, it's to the critical parts where water is, they have clean water, they are able to pipe the water to the households, and there's then collection of the payments, which goes back into funding and making the concession sustainable. And it has made public service of water provision easier and simpler for municipalities. We also see in our operations from NTISO consulting point of view, where we now are having to resuscitate wastewater treatment plants, where we have to come up with operations and maintenance because there simply are no skills on the ground to be able to run those treatment plants. And this is a case in point where partnerships can take place, and not only just to run or operate the facilities, but to also keep them growing or build them and expand them for future growth. So I think from a municipal point of view, PPPs are supposed to be the silver bullet, if I may put it in that way, to expand the services, to take pressure away from the fiscus, to deal with anomalies where there is no economic base and payments, and still deliver a quality service so that service delivery does not become an issue.
Is this the case because local government is failing? So if treatment works were being maintained, were being serviced the way that they needed to, we would not be having this conversation, would we?
Obviously, we would not be having this conversation. So I think even the idea that services that are supposed to be provided by government are being privatized. So who then must provide those services if government has shortfalls, has challenges, has difficulties to bring those services forward? The option then is that let's look at who else has the skills to be able to support government, because the provision of those services are still provided at the behest of government. So if there were no problems such as that, I don't think we would be talking about off-balance sheet financing of public infrastructure. We would not be talking about project finance. We would not be talking of triple Ps. We would be in a sphere where the fiscus would be adequate to fund everything and anything that is required for public good. So the issue there is that there is definitely, it's not a bottomless pit. There is finite collections that are taking place that can only be able to cover certain services that government can provide.
But Miyelani, is this not, number one, giving government a way out in terms of its own mandate and responsibilities? Number two, even when it comes to these public-private partnerships, there are always issues when it comes to the individuals that are lined up for some of these deals. That often, yes, it may, off the face of it, look like it's a competitive process, but actually it's not. because the different players behind the scenes have already been identified. Amongst those who know, there's already an idea that, okay, when we send out a particular request that looks for 1, 2, 3, 4, there are people who have already been prepared. They've already started working on their paperwork. So when Kathy and Miyelani show up with their proposals, all they're doing is wasting their time, because it's already been decided that Zelma is actually the one that's going to get into this partnership. And again, that's where it becomes problematic, because the landscape for it, the ecosystem within which all of this takes place, is not an open and transparent one. Yes, they could well be the tick box exercise of making it look like it is, but it is not.
So there's currently a revision of the Triple P framework and regulations that is currently taking place. My own, or at least our views, from Ndiso Consulting point of view, is that let's look at how the transversal tenders are being concluded by National Treasury, and create a panel of possible partners that can work with government in the provision of various infrastructure. So in this case, we believe that it's one opportunity which can be opened up to so many of the players that are there. We must also understand that it's not everyone who can finance a 31 billion rands facility. So you would have to be of a particular caliber. So we would advocate that let the process be run beforehand without even knowing which public amenity or infrastructure is going to be financed, because there is multiple government projects that should be prepared, packaged and sent out to the private sector. So go out and fetch 30 different players, of which once they are sitting within a transversal tender or a panel, there can then be allocations where each one of the players within there can competitively, or at least transparently, be able to participate in financing the infrastructure. Of course, the issue of transparency is one that with this particular process would be managed even better, because you are sitting within a panel. If those projects are allocated to only one party, it means there's a risk that they may not be able to complete each one of the projects, because these are multi-billion rand projects that must be put into the market or completed. So in that way, you want to create at least an egalitarian type, transparent system that allows whoever sits in that particular panel, whether it's a 5-year panel or however many years that they would be part of that panel, but you go through the transparent way of onboarding partners that government can then work with in the various sectors, obviously, that each one would be representing.
We're going to take a quick break. I'm back with some of the contributions from our listeners too.
Municipal Watch, bringing your local issues on the national agenda. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
All right, we continue our conversation on Municipal Watch, public-private partnerships. I'm taking your contributions to this conversation. 086 000 2032. Are there low-hanging fruit at local government where you think these partnerships could be crucial in helping improve services? Your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107. Lucky Nkwashu Miyelani says it's deliberate that triple Ps are not used at local government level because the opportunities for corruption and looting through projects are eliminated. There's no opportunity for cost overruns, and the projects are closely monitored and completed on time and on budget. The model that you're referring to, the build, operate and transfer, which is most commonly used and implemented around the world. It is used also in first world countries. So he agrees there with Miyelani. Let's play this WhatsApp voice note.
Morning, Casey and the listeners. This is Magdalene from Lee. Casey and the listeners, there will never be a change in the municipalities as long as we are still voting for ANC into power as a sole authority for municipalities. Because whoever comes into a position of mayor nor city manager and MMCs. Those people are only interested in self-enrichment. Even the comrades who voted them into power or deployed them into power expect them to do something for them. That is why we are going to experience Gobo's deployment. That Gobo's deployment itself is dangerous. Magdalene from Bloom, thank you.
All right, thank you for those contributions. And Miyelani, again, I want you just to, after you've responded to our listeners, also just touch on this issue of the perception that some of these triple Ps are simply a transfer of eating, for lack of a better phrase, from one group of eaters to another group of eaters that somehow have become a lot more professional, a lot more organized in their eating.
I think it could be a fair perception because the triple Ps are not accessible to the person in the street. As we're talking during the break, is you need significant financial resources. You have to have a proven track record of skills within your organization. You also need to have, the various partnerships that would allow you to be able to leverage some of the skills that you may not perhaps have. So the perception, of course, is that in as much because of the sheer cost and scale of such projects that can be undertaken through triple Ps, it's not someone who has a grade 1 general building grade, CIDB grading, that could wake up and say, I'm going to be submitting my bid to go and build whatever building. The other aspect is that where triple Ps perhaps can be seen as a way of, as you put it, whether it's transferring the eating or whichever way you'd like to put it, or transferring opportunities or closing in opportunities for that matter, it is when triple Ps are being used to deliver offices for government. Our view is that, that is not the design of what a triple P should be used for, because just to design to deliver a head office for government does not make the difference in the public, if I may put it in that way. But if it's to deliver a service of health, of a road, of a stadium, public transport, and all of those amenities that would touch people and have an impact, then you'd be utilizing those opportunities correctly. How triple Ps should be opened up, we say there's design. So it means that there is a team of people that must be working on the designs and whatever the case may be. That would allow, whether it's engineers, from across, the walks of life in South Africa, whether it's international, partnering with local engineers, medium-sized, small-sized, and so on. That can open up an opportunity for that. The next, aspect is where you are doing the building. The building allows, for many different, people from different, gradings and different, persuasions to be able to form part of that particular consortium that would have been concluded. The financing can be exclusively the domain of the banks or the big, asset managers and so on and so forth. But be that as it may, you want horses for courses. So you want to get the best person who has the capability to undertake that. The operations is something that can also be opened up for various, facilities management companies, whether they are startups, whether they are new, and there are many facets that can be managed within that particular project. So I'm just showing the fact that, and then the maintenance aspects. You can also allow your micro or your small enterprises to form part of the teams that can maintain the air conditioning, the windows, the doors, the this, and so on. So really, I think, it should be seen as a way of packaging opportunities where multiple people and companies and organizations and institutions can together participate. So, for instance, if government is able to put up 30 of these different partners that they can work with, it means each one of those partners should be able to tick a box on inclusion of women, inclusion of disabilities, inclusion of youth, inclusion and micro businesses, rural businesses, and so on. So it can be such a criteria that upfront, we can then be able to assess that consortium number 1 is a great partner because it ticks the boxes in terms of involvement of all of the vulnerable groups, of all the smaller businesses and so on. So then it makes it, fair for everyone. Then the issue becomes, how do you then bring in finance and expertise into that particular group and get it, running? So the perceptions notwithstanding, but the opportunities that can be packaged through a PPP can also be enormous and can open up areas that would otherwise be locked for even smaller players.
Okay, so that's just then one perspective in terms of how we can help solve some of the problems at local government. It's 11 o'clock, time for your latest news update.